Hi everybody, I hope you're doing marvellously well. I'm very excited to interview Kirk Brandon. Now, you may or may not know who he is. He was in a band called Theatre of Hate and also Spear of Destiny. Actually, both bands are still going to this day, but Theatre of Hate and Spear of Destiny, very, very influential in the early 80s in Britain. So many of us that were listening to music at that period and then went on to start bands were really heavily influenced by them. Theatre of Hate did have a pretty big hit single in Britain with Do You Believe in the Westworld, which was produced by Mick Jones of The Clash. After that success, people were obviously expecting more from the band, but unfortunately they broke up. Apparently on the eve of their American tour, which I'm sure would have made them into relative household names back in the 80s. So Kirk started another band, Spear of Destiny, and he went off and made a really important record, produced actually by Nick Launay, one of our good friends who we feature a lot on the channel. And that album was called Grapes of Wrath, or as Americans say, Grapes of Wrath. Again, a very, very important and influential album. I often, when I feature artists like this, people will say to me, how can they be influential if they haven't sold 100 million records? Well, you've got to remember, as an artist like myself, as a guitar player, songwriter, guy in a band at this period, just getting started, this stuff is really, really influential. The Enemy, for instance, loved Theatre of Hate, and I would read about them all the time. So much so that I would go and see them live. I was trying to remember which show it was, but I was 15 years old, pretending to be 18. It was a wonderful, wonderful time for music. Between sort of 76 and 85, there were so many genres of music that were happening. It was so powerful. It was a really, really exciting time for music, and both Theatre of Hate and Spear of Destiny were a big part of shaping the sound. They may not have had the massive success of bands like U2, etc., but in the music scene of the time, they were massively important. So please stay tuned for this interview with the primary songwriter and the lead singer and guitar player of Theatre of Hate and Spear of Destiny. How are you today?
Not bad, not bad. Pretty good day. A lot of things going on, but just trying to get my head in gear again.
So where do you live now? Are you still in London?
No, I left London, went down to Brighton. Actually, it's a very long story. I was in Philly for 3 years. I was in Copenhagen for a couple of years. Then I come back to London, went down to Hastings, back to London, back down to Brighton.
Amazing.
All in a day.
All in a day. Brighton's beautiful, though. I have some really good friends there. It's got a really great music scene and just kind of alternative lifestyle. It's fantastic, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like the alternative centre of England. Although Manchester is pretty hot for music, I must say.
I remember there being a lot of really good jazz in Brighton. Like Courtney Pine used to live down there when I was a kid. I remember, so there was a good scene. It's definitely eclectic, I think is a good word.
Oh yeah. That's a good word. Very eclectic. A ton of rock, not rock as in heavy rock, but indie rock.
Right.
Whatever that means nowadays.
I have no idea anymore. I don't know what's indie. I don't know what's alternative. It used to be easy to spot. Now you can be a major label band and still be alternative. We grew up with like Rough Trade and labels like that. And when it was on Rough Trade, you knew it was alternative. It was indie.
Yeah.
Now you can be on some huge Sony label and still be called alternative, doesn't?
Yeah, I mean, people say to me, "What kind of music is it?" And I go, "Alternative." It's the alternative to the alternative.
So, give me a little background. So you're born in London.
Born in Westminster. Yeah.
Your first...
The cheap seats, I'm afraid.
The cheap seats. Yeah.
Cheap seats. Yeah.
You weren't rattling your jewellery.
I wish I had some. Hard pressed to get a crucifix nowadays.
So you're born in London. So I suppose Pack is the first band that people write about. Was that really your first band?
It wasn't the first band. I was involved in a little band called The Cane before that, as in Mutiny on the Cane. But the Pack was the first thing. Sort of, the Pack really come from that sort of South London, grungy, kind of squatting, politically alternative background. And it was a funny scene. There's a lot of people living in that scene that never made it through, obviously. But they kind of collapsed in that scene. I mean, there's a ton of drugs, a ton of really crazy stuff going on. And, some made it through, some didn't. That's about the best way I can put it. But also some great things come out of it. Some really great things come out of it. I was very lucky. I actually met two Canadian brothers called Simon and John Werner. Regrettably, Simon died, 10 years ago or something. But I'm still friends with John, and we occasionally play Wheel Out the Pack stuff. He always wanted to do it. For years and years, he said, why don't we do it? And in the end, I just said, yeah, okay, let's do it. We found a couple of other people to help out. And it's brilliant to see Johnny doing his stuff again. I really enjoyed it. It's great stuff.
So how did that morph into Theatre of Hate?
Well, the pack sort of went on from the end of 78 into 79 and then split up in 79. And then in 1980, decided to give it another go again and do something completely different. I'd had a load of riffs hanging around from when I was a teenager. I had an old schoolmate, Steve Guthrie, brilliant guitar player, really off the wall. Like his reference points was Captain Beefheart, really off the wall stuff. And I met Stanley one day, Stan Stammers, met Stanley on the tube going through South London. And he said, he asked me what I was doing. He liked the pack. And I said, well, the pack's folded. He said, well, if you get me together, bear me in mind. And I said, yeah, sure. That's what I did, we gave him a phone call. We found John Leonard through an advert on Melody Maker, that newspaper, the music paper.
Yeah.
And he was the only guy that turned up. And he turned up with a grey fedora and leather strides and cowboy boots.
That's amazing.
He's just a really strange guy. I thought, yeah, okay, you're in.
Right.
Weirdos welcome. And we sort of took it down the rehearsal room. We had a drummer called Luke Rendell. The five of us took it down the rehearsal room and just eked out the riffs I had, which was great fun. And it was really something really new. And I remember one time, like the Ruts were there, when Malcolm and Paul Fox were still alive, and they were rehearsing in the next room to us at this place called the Sunday School. And they came in and said, oi, what's all this about? And I said, I remember them saying, what are you doing next week? Nothing. Do you want to go on tour? Yeah. So we went on tour with the Ruts. That was our first tour.
That's pretty amazing. So which drummer was this? Is this before Nigel Preston or?
Before Nigel, yeah. This was the original drum. The latter end of it, we had a bit of a sea change. The guitar player, Steve Guthrie, left. Luke had left before him. We got in Nigel Preston, the late Nigel Preston, and of course Billy Duffy. And that was the last edition of Theatre of Hate in 1982. Incredible.
I have to ask, so you had a pretty big hit with Do You Believe in the Westworld? I mean, I was actually playing it earlier to educate Eric in the background so he knew what was going on. That was a pretty big hit. First of all, I've got to say, Theatre of Hate is probably one of the best band names ever. You seem to, I mean, between that and Spear of Destiny, you always had a name that would grab you, and you're looking at the press, you're like, I have to know about this band. This band must be so cool.
Thank you.
I mean, obviously, Spear of Destiny, when you came out with that, every kid was like, we understood the relevance, and it was pretty darn powerful. I mean, those were the times. I mean, in the very early 80s, everything was so, with Margaret Thatcher being in, everything was so politically charged, as you well remember.
Yeah, everything was political. Music was political. Everything. The BBC is hard. Well, it's always political, but it was like under siege. They had guards on the doors, and it was like really mad. It was really crazy times. It was like, there was a little whiff of like revolutionary type stuff going around in 79, 80. Margaret Thatcher didn't really help. She was such an extreme person, and she really antagonised at least half the population. Let's put it that way. It sounds strange now looking back because most young people aren't interested in politics or social stuff like that, political, social stuff. But at the time, everybody was because they were sort of like living through it. Today, people just want to run away from it. And I don't blame them. I really don't. I mean, it's just so ridiculous out there, you know. It's like, you know, George Orwell was the prophet. Well, it's all come true, you know. That's how I sort of feel about it.
Absolutely.
1984 every day.
Absolutely. So you have this big hit. I mean, the album did great. The single was huge. Why break up the band and start a new one?
It's difficult to sort of like pin it down, but I think a lot of it was to do with the manager. He had a lot of influence, and quite a bit of it, I'm not going to say it was negative. I'll just say, I'm not even going to say it's misguided. I'm going to say it is without any guidance. It was like a little bit like pillar to post, bit headless chicken sometimes. He always had his eyes on the prize, but that wasn't necessarily the right thing for the band. I think it got pretty confused come the end, and I admit it, I got confused. It was kind of this way, that way, this way, that way. And I it was very difficult. It was a very difficult situation to be in. I don't really want to go into specifics, but it become a bit antagonistic and a bit weird, and it almost seemed like, let's just stop this before something really goes wrong. Retrospectively, I will say what I should have done was told everybody, right, we're going to take 6 months, a year off, go do whatever it is you've got to do, get it out of your system, and come back and we'll start again in a year's time. That's what I should have said. Unfortunately, I didn't. Looking back, great, you know, it's easy. And it kind of imploded one day in the rehearsal room. And that was the end of that. I mean, it was so brief. All we had to do was hold it together, but we were incapable of doing it. And the management at the time wasn't really helping, really not helping whatsoever.
So the manager was, presumably, I'm sort of reading between the lines, was feeding you, oh, don't worry about it, we'll do something new with you, it'll be fine. Sort of not being supportive of the band, but talking in your ear?
Oh, yes, I would say that's true. I would say that's true, Your Honour.
So you start Spear of Destiny. Grapes of Wrath, or as Americans would say, Wrath, one of my favourite records, and a very, very important record of the time. I'd love to know a little bit more about that, because Nick at the time was probably about your age. He was another young guy, wasn't he? Nick Launay.
Nick Launay, was it? Yeah.
Yeah. He was probably 24 as well, 25.
Very young guy, yeah.
Yeah, fresh off the boat, just done a Pill record and all this kind of stuff. Did you have songs left over that you'd been working on with Theatre of Hate? Had you written completely new stuff?
We actually recorded at the end of the Theatre of Hate thing. We recorded the second album, which was going to be called Aria of the Devil. And again, we did it with Mick Jones from The Clash. Mick produced it and Jeremy Green engineered it. The Jolly Green Giant. And that was his nickname. But the band broke up and the thing never came out. It came out possibly, God knows, 10, 20 years later, I don't know. We had a whole load of songs there and we used well over 50% for the first Spear album because we'd signed to CBS and they were clamouring for products. They're clamouring for an album,
Yeah, I mean, Westworld obviously produced by Mick Jones, which at the time was probably a pretty huge deal. I mean, there you go, got one of the main writers and singers in The Clash. How is it working with, an artist who's one of the early forays into production, rather than an established producer? Was it actually quite, exciting because you were on the same level and you were talking?
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to say, Mick was way ahead of us. I mean, way ahead of us. Mick knew his way around the studio. He knew about, it sounds ridiculous, but he knew about delays, but he knew how to work them, how to make them work. And a lot of that stuff was done off an analogue desk up at Wessex, the classic studio, one of the classic studios. And it was all hand triggered. So they said, come over here. When you get to that point, trigger it. When you get fed up with that, hit it again, that turns it off. And there was like about 4 or 5 guys on the desk with the delays, you know. And it's quite funny. I mean, people today would go, that must have been chaos. It kind of was, but it kind of worked. And Mick had set it up, obviously. Yeah, he was brilliant. And his ideas kept coming. He always had ideas, and his whole, you know, artist management, if you want to put it that way, is fantastic. You know, he's just such a positive guy doing stuff, you know, that was interesting. Plus, he loved the songs. I mean, when you think about it, you know, everyone was expecting, as people put it at the time, a continuation of the songs Original Sin and Legion, and they expected a continuation of that kind of sound. But what they got was a completely different sound altogether. And it really took people by surprise. A lot of people had difficulty coming to terms with it. They're expecting sort of really, really grungy guitar, and it just didn't go that way, you know. I remember the Pretenders were in before us, and I asked, what's his name, Honeyman Scott, can I borrow your twin? He said, sure, man, just put it in a cab and you finish with it. So I had his Fender Twin and recorded it with his Fender Twin. So obviously Fender Twins, unless you turn them completely up, are pretty clear.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I know, but, you know, at the time I didn't, you know, to me it was a really good amp, and it was just kind of, you know, yeah, let's use that. And I asked him and he said, yes, that was really cool. I think we just bought the Specials drum kit off the Specials, and that was what was used on the album. And it was at a really tiny bass drum, almost like a comedy bass drum. But it was incredible sound. You couldn't believe that sound come off this tiny bass drum. It was like, that is loud. That is really like thumping. Brad sold it to Luke, the drummer. I mean, fantastic sounds up at Wessex, you know, really great sound. I mean, you know, there was the usual, oh God, it's gone out of my head, the reverb unit that everybody used, the Lexicon.
Yep.
A ton of Lexicon, Publicum, and just fantastic valve channels. You know, real pokey channels. So many great albums were recorded there. You know, the Pretenders albums, Nevermind the Bollocks was done there.
Right.
Bill Price produced it, and Jeremy Green was the tape op.
Yeah.
When he first started.
Bill Price was such an amazing engineer. I was trying to interview him a few years ago, and then, of course, he died before. Very sad. Yeah, his resume's insane. Yeah, Pretenders' first record, Nevermind the Bollocks. Yeah, just London Calling, everything.
It's all there, all done at Wessex. Right?
Amazing.
So it's a real classic studio. It's a shame. It's such a shame it's gone, but there you go. Hey, the modern world.
Yeah, one of my friends has the console. Has the console in his studio.
Okay, brilliant.
Big old Cadillac, and I have the sidecar from it. It's sitting over there.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah, I'm pretty obsessed. I know what I like. So
I'll tell you a really stupid anecdote. They had a room upstairs, like a cafe, you know, and this buttress coming out like an overhang buttress, and they told me I was pretty dim, you know, and they told me, yeah, that last guy come up here, you know, and he's bashed his brains out, suicide on that, you know, and I went, yeah, really? Oh, wow. Like a muppet. I just, for that 10 seconds, believed it. You know, Mick thought that was hysterical. I mean, I was just a simpleton, yeah.
Let's go to Spear of Destiny. So you start the new band. Yeah. You've got about half of the songs already written from Theatre of Hate days. And it was the album that came out, is that the 10 years after? Has that got songs from?
Yes, from the Theatre of Hate one, yeah. That was it, yeah. Great it's a bit convoluted here. Albums recorded but not released. Then at least 50% ended up on the Grapes of Wrath Spear album, first album, yeah. And the other half of it was me kind of exploring, you know, a bit more with musical styles, I suppose. A lot of different styles on it, a lot of different sounds. I bought myself a Roland Space Echo, you know, the old tape machine. and they're a fortune today, apparently.
They
Like
are, yes.
£1,000 or something. Yeah, I was having fun with that.
There was a great quote. I was looking at this last night. It said Spear foundered in the lower reaches of the top 50 and then faded away. This their debut album, so you're like, oh, thanks very much. And then it goes, this their debut album reminds listeners of precisely how unjust the fate was. I mean, it's one of the most complete albums. It's interesting that it comes up as a debut album. You've got half the songs written from the old days. You're in the studio and experimenting, but it still sounds so fresh for the time. I'm wondering the fire, because you've had a big hit single, a year before with Theatre of Hate. You've been produced by Mick Jones of The Clash, one of the biggest rock bands and post-punk rock bands in the world at the time.
Yeah.
I mean, what was the energy like going into the studio to make that album?
It's really hard to describe because we're so expectant. It was colossal. Everybody had their hopes high, expectation was high. We didn't really know what we were doing. Hey, we're going to make an album. What's going to happen? I don't know. Mick knows what he's doing. It was a bit like that. And there we were at Wessex, one of the best studios that existed in throughout the 80s or 90s, whatever it was. And okay, let's do it. All right, let's do it. So, we set up, screen stuff off, and I sung in. When I come round to singing, Jeremy Green set me up in front of the glass, in front of the where the control room was. And I said, "Why am I doing this, Jerry?" He goes, "Well, it comes." I was using a Neumann. I prefer Neumanns, and it comes straight back off the glass. He said it comes back off hard. He said, "This is where Joe used to sing, up against the glass here. He used to sing up against the glass like this." So I said, "All right, okay, great, yeah, sure." So you just took it that, people like Jeremy Green and Mick did know what they're doing, which they did. Yeah, amazing stuff. We were so hyped up. I remember one time, because we were about the tuning of the instruments, and Mick brought in a Strobo tuner. If you remember Strobo tuner, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Of course, yeah. The outer's going round and the inner's going the other way. Okay. And he said, use this. And I remember Stanley went, we stood there, watch what he was doing for it. And Stanley goes, I'm not using this fucking Dalek to tune my guitar. Why don't we just do it off the piano like we normally do? Looking back, it's just ridiculous. But, you're young and simple in the head at the time. Great time in my life. Great in all our lives. Brilliant time. We went out and Clash took us out on tour around the UK and in Europe. So, it was a brilliant time in our lives.
Absolutely. So when you were in making Greats of Wrath with Nick Launay, what was your experience there? Which studio were you in to do that record? Was that back in Wessex?
No, we did that in Townhouse 2.
Oh, of course, Townhouse.
Which is where the little stone room
Yep.
was. It's where famously, the Phil Collins, I can hear it coming in the air tonight, boom,
Yep.
boom, boom, that drum sound.
That drum sound, yeah.
That is from that stone room. Weirdly enough, I remember one of the guys said, come and have a look at it, because we were using it. And Chris Bell, the drummer, was going to set his Gretsch up in there. So he pulled back the carpet, pulled up this trapdoor, and underneath, although you couldn't really see, there's a disused swimming pool down there. It's kind of weird. You couldn't really see it in the dark. I said, is there? And he goes, oh, yeah, disused swimming pool. For whatever reason, there was a swimming pool then. I don't know. But that sound that come back from that stone was fantastic. It's so documented. I mean, everybody knows that sound.
Oh, absolutely,
that particular stone room sound.
Yep. All started with Peter Gabriel and Phil Collins playing on that. And, Hugh Padgham. And it was like Hugh, Stephen Lee White and Nick Launay that all worked together.
Yeah, Lillywhite used it a lot. I know that. With Simple Minds, yeah.
So with that record, the expectations were going to be massive. You had the big hit single with Theatre of Hate. You now got the new band. How was that going into that?
I would say, I'm not going to say the expectation wasn't high, but I think Nick Launay, I think he'd come in there with a bit of a different idea on what the band should be, I remember I recorded a solo for the actual song Grapes of Wrath. And I said, great, I'll come in. It's about as good as I'll get. And I came in. I said, let's hear it back. And he goes, no, I didn't record it. I said, what do you mean you didn't record it? He said, I didn't record it. I said, why not? He goes, it sounds too much like a guitar. And then I can't remember, was it me or Stanley said, Nick, it is a guitar. It's a Gretsch, a 1961 Gretsch. That's what it's going to sound like. And I think we've come in at cross purposes. I think he was coming in for Depeche Mode or something. But that's not really what he got. He's a nice guy, though. Don't get me wrong. He was a nice guy, and he got into it. I think he just didn't really know the hell what it was we were doing. Like, he hadn't got his head around it. In deference to him, we were still trying to find it, even when we got in that studio. We didn't have it absolutely defined or even 50% defined. We were looking for a sound. When you're looking for something, it's in there somehow. You just got to make it, whatever it is, work. I know. I'm sure you've done it 1,000 times. I'm sure you've done it 1,000 times. You're trying to define yourself as you're doing it.
Yeah,
and we were looking. We were definitely looking.
Yeah, I mean, it was that time, wasn't it? Like in those sort of late 70s through like early 80s. Everybody was trying to be fresh and different and new and break down boundaries. Yeah. So, I mean, I often talk about it between like 76 and like 85. It might be a 9 or 10 year period, but we had punk, post-punk, new wave, new romantics, ska, two-tone. I mean, new wave of British heavy metal. Everything all happened in this short space of time. And then that's all fun. Of the crossing between all of those genres, all the synth pop stuff and everything. It was just insane how creative it was at that period.
Yeah, it really was. I look back and I think, there's so much going on like that synth pop stuff. There's Depeche Mode playing this kind of binky bonky binky, that kind of funny kind of synth music they used to make in the early days. And you just think, I don't get this. But they evolved into what they became.
Right.
And like so many people might have started one way, but their evolution carried on. And over that, like you say, that 10-year period, inside that 10-year period, people evolved. And they became something sometimes quite different. But there was room for it. There was room for it in, this is another discussion altogether, there was room for it in the media, as in it was easier to get into the media, easier to go through newspapers or radio stations. Record pluggers were plugging these new sounds and people getting excited about new sounds. And the DJs were excited. Their producers were excited by new sounds. It's like, what's next? What's going to happen next? Wow. What's this? Wow. I don't know. Well, put it on, it's like that.
Yeah, it was a very, very exciting time indeed. So Never Take Me Alive, I'm sure, is going to be a song that if people know the name Spear of Destiny, are going to know it pretty well. It was a big hit. Can you give me a little background to that?
I did it with a bass player, basically Steve Barnacle, around at his house. We did it on a very early Apple. And, dick, 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 that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I just played along. He put it down to code, and then that really distinctive hi-hat, which goes through it with the delay on it, starts the song off that, and with the sort of delay, and it rolls over itself, and it goes into the off-rhythm drums. I mean, that was my idea to that rhythm. I actually programmed Steve said, why don't you do on the keyboard, do the fills? And I did the fills on a keyboard. Just something entirely new for me. It was only meant to be a demo. When it got played to the company, 10 Records, they turned around and everyone said, we love it, it's fantastic. Great. When are you going to finish it? I said, we haven't put it down yet. And they were absolutely adamant, this is it. So Steve transferred it onto the desk system, and that was it. Basically done the rhythm section for the whole thing, and the arrangement was done on Steve's little computer at home.
Amazing.
And then we transferred it, and I put the Gretsch straight into the desk, no amp. I just went straight into the desk. That's why it sounds so clean, kind of distinctive in its own way. When you do things like that, he put the bass, the fretless, put a fretless bass on it, which was all the flavour at the time.
It
If you
certainly
remember.
was.
I actually think it's quite a cool sound, even
It
though
sounds
it's
great on
like,
the song.
hello, it's the 80s. When someone plays a fretless, you just think 80s.
Yeah.
It's a cool instrument, I think. And then it was actually mixed. We took it from where we recorded it, somewhere way out West London. And we took it to Zeus B. Held, the famous German producer. And Zeus had done everybody, Simple Minds, U2, pick a name, he'd done them all. He was a great guy, really funny, kind of anarcho German music producer. He was a funny guy. I remember saying something like, can we get some orchestration on the end of it? And he said, yeah, sure, man. Yeah, sure. And he goes, I've got the thing for you. And so he had Beethoven's Mass for the Dead. And so he sampled that and he just put it into the keyboard and used the sounds from it. And that's them stab, do, and all that kind of stuff is sonics of Beethoven's Mass for the Dead, although it's not playing the Mass for the Dead, but it's, you know what I mean? Did a great, fantastic job on it.
I'm going to go back and re-listen to it now that I actually know that that's what happened. I didn't realise that started off as a demo and then just kind of added to it. But that makes sense because it's got a very organic feel about it. Everything makes sense, even though it's the 80s and even though it does have fretless bass on it.
Yeah.
So what are you doing now? What's you're still out? I noticed reading up on you that you do both bands. So you and Stan go out and you do Taurus Theatre of Hate and you tour a Spear of Destiny.
Yeah, we sort of got back in touch, and me and Stanley, and we go back a long way. We go back a really long way, and we got Chris involved, Chris Bell, who's the drummer on. This is all convoluted again. Who's the drummer on the album Grace of Wrath? He's a great guy. He's an amazing drummer. Real beast of a drummer up there. Real primitivism. So we had me, Stanley, and Chris, and I thought, I don't really know any sax players. I mean, I know a few. I checked out this guy I used to know years ago called Clive Osborne, and Clive's a really wacky guy and a great old-time rock and roll player. So I drafted him into Spear and I drafted him into Theatre of Hate. So it was just, after I don't know about going looking for more sax players, and he's a really funny man. So it's very easy to be with,
That's fantastic.
If you're going to go across America in a van, you need people that are kind of easy to get on with.
Are you coming over to America?
Yeah, we're coming over. There's a tour September, October next year. It's The Mission, Chameleons, and Theatre of Hate.
Nice. 3
bands. It's everybody knows each other and we all get on. So it's going to be a great tour. It's going to be a really great tour.
Back in the 80s with both Theatre and Spear of Destiny, did you get to come and tour over here much?
We didn't. Theatre of Hate, ironically, broke up once again on the eve of the American tour. That was when we were about to come over. It was planned and all the rest of it, and the band just disintegrated at the end. I think to tell you the truth, I think it blew everyone's head off, mine included. Went up too hard, too fast.
You definitely had a nice gradual build-up before the big success, but I suppose when it comes, you don't know, do you? You don't know how you're going to react.
You don't. And people around you sort of, they would never admit it, but they have kind of changed because it's no longer the situation of some guys just standing around with a half a lager or a pint in their hand. It's not like that anymore. It's just... And also, we were on tour constantly, all over Europe, just constant.
Speaking of which, are you planning any European stuff as well? You're coming here in September, October of next year. Are you back out?
We're planning some stuff. I'm not sure. Somewhere April, May, June, July, August, somewhere there with Theatre of Hate, maybe. Like to do that, because they did quite well out there in Europe. the times we've taken it out there recently, in recent years, it did very well. Sort of buzz is there for it. People want to see it. So great.
So what does your life look like these days? Are you basically still recording, still writing, playing either with Spear and theatre?
Yeah, I mean, my time is taken up pretty much. It's kind of, we just recorded the new Spear album, which is coming out in very beginning of November, called Ghost Population. There's a story to that. It's a bit of a wacky story. I saw this thing online about DNA, and they've got all these. have you got a couple of minutes? I'll tell you if you want.
Please.
It's just really mad stuff. It's just you've got DNA of like Homo neanderthalis, Homo denisovian. There's about 5 or 7 of these ancient peoples, before we were around. And they got this DNA, and they kept coming up with something. They didn't really understand it. When they actually understood it, it was part of the DNA was different. So, cut a long story short, they worked out that there was pre-races before them, or a pre-race before them. And they called it ghost population because they don't know what it is. All they've got is just samples in DNA around the world. But they know it's there, but they don't really know what it is. And I in a silly moment of metaphor, I thought we're kind of like peripheral, marginal people out there that no one really knows about anymore. As in, we're not part of any mainstream. We're kind of working outside of the mainstream, and there's armies of people out there doing this. You think about the mainstream, and everyone's trying to break into the mainstream, but the majority of people playing music aren't in it. You know a lot better than I do, but things over here are so controlled.
Right.
You can't. It's tough to get on radio stations. There's one station you can get on, BBC Radio 6, and that's about the only one you can get on.
Radio 6? I didn't even know there was a Radio 6. That's new to me.
Oh, okay. Well, that's
when I left, there was still only 4.
Yeah. It's online. That's where you'll hear things that if you're going to hear something a bit new, or maybe when I say new, that could be 30 years ago. But, when you're going to hear something that's not mainstream, that's where you'll hear it.
Right.
Aside from that, in the whole mainstream, there's nothing else. Everything else is just pop, whether it's rap, pop, or whatever music. And this really bizarre music they play on BBC Radio 1, which is, you'd have to hear it to try and work it out. I don't know what it is. Some kind of sub-African music with people trying to sing like Michael Jackson or something on it, or Stevie Wonder. It's bizarre what goes on, really bizarre stuff. And I wonder who they're playing it to. I mean, they must be playing it to somebody. Somebody must be listening.
So obviously it's working for them.
Yeah. Next time you're over, check it out, and you'll just go, where am I? What is going on? What is this?
I know. It was interesting when I first got married. I came back with my wife, and so I'm coming back with my young son, and we get in a cab from the airport, and listening to the radio, and I realised, we have such incredible heritage of music from Britain, and I don't think I heard a guitar the whole drive. I think it was a 45-minute drive, and everything was just, it was.
Yeah. Chris explained to me, Chris Bell, the drummer, he said he broke it all down. He said, this is like, I can't remember what part of Africa it is. He said this is like sub-African beats, and with this sort of bizarre keyboard sounds, really quite strange production. If you took the voices off of it, you think, where are we now? What is this about? I mean, this is really odd music. It could be, music as you pick vegetables in a supermarket, or
right.
I don't know, whatever. And then if you put on the singer, they're invariably like a very young Stevie Wonder, Michael Jackson, kind of voice, singing, really are. And they're all, I don't know, it's just bizarre. Check it out. You'll get it. After 10 minutes, you'll just go, oh my God, what happened?
I suppose they're just not making music for us anymore. That's
there you go.
bottom line. The bottom
That's
line.
the
there.
truth. That's
Yeah.
the truth.
Well, Kurt, this has been absolutely fantastic. Your day, I'm excited. The album's coming out in November, you said?
Yeah, very beginning of November, Ghost Population.
Ghost Population, great. In America, are they selling physical copies or just streaming? Are you gonna sell CDs,
Yeah,
vinyl, and
Yeah, we'll be streaming it as well. Get you both. Get you what you call it, a download, and I'll sort it out with Liam. To get
Right.
you on.
That'd be absolutely amazing. All right, you rock. Thanks ever so much. I really appreciate it. Say hi to Stan.
Thank you.
Is he camera shy, you think?
No. Stanley is 24 hours Stanley.
Yeah.
He is exactly the way he is.
Yeah.
He's a good guy. He's a funny man.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Kirk. I really appreciate your time.
Great.
Thanks.
Take
a
care,
lot.
man.
I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you ever so much for watching. Please leave us any comments and questions below and let us know what other bands do you feel were like this, such massively influential bands. Obviously, there's the American bands like the Velvet Underground and Iggy Pop and the Stooges, of course. Many others, German bands like Neu, were really important that never really found mainstream top 40 success. What bands like that do you think we should cover? Thanks ever so much for watching. Have a marvellous time. So long, farewell, auf Wiedersehen, au revoir, adios, tutsins, ciao, goodbye.